Also very intense on my computer.
Right.
So the file size is so big.
See ya.
See ya.
Back on.
Okay.
You can do hashtag #DulaLen.
Hashtag DulaLen. I can link it in the description.
Yeah.
So.
No, I was joking, half joking. We can think about those later.
Yeah, don't worry. We'll figure out. Okay. Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. So this podcast is mostly about having a bit of a discussion with the people in my life and around the philosophies that direct them in life, and hopefully in that discussion I can sort of connect with the people in my life a bit more deeply and hopefully extract some wisdom from them. And I like sharing them because maybe if an individual watching this has some ideas that they can take away from it, that's a really cool thing too. So today I have Duho with me. Do you want to give a bit of an introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I work as an economist, living in London, fellow Londoner, love food, music, and striving to improve on day-to-day life satisfaction, which I think is where we enjoy sharing thoughts and philosophies as well. So really excited to have this chat, which is extension of our conversation whenever we have quality chats. So
yeah, this is not a new thing for us.
Exactly.
We've been having these. We actually met in the first couple of weeks of university. So I've known him for a very long time now, and we've had many of these conversations before. But it'd be nice to have it a bit more contoured, I guess, to some extent. So yeah, the theme of this podcast is more about the philosophies that sort of direct your life and some of the decisions that you make. So I guess this part has been premeditated slightly. I have posed him the question to bring a bit of philosophy to the conversation. So do you just want to share that with us?
yeah, so I've thought about this because I follow your YouTube and watch podcasts, and there are different bits to my philosophy when I think about them.
Yeah, it's fine.
And I think the key thing, most simple thing I thought of sharing with you first is at the end of my yoga, I say namaste, and I learned through yoga teacher what that means.
Okay.
It might be one interpretation of many,
Okay.
but the interpretation goes, you say thank you to those who you practice yoga with, including the instructor. You say thank you to Mother Earth, the planet, the nature, and you say thank you to yourself for taking time and effort to do that practice. And it struck me that it wasn't saying thank you to the teacher.
Right.
It wasn't appreciating your own time. It wasn't the worshipping of the nature, all three of which we often hear about individually. But actually this brings all of them together in one way of appreciation. And I quite think that's the top level illustration of my life philosophy. It's appreciation of people around me. It's about the planet, which is bigger than people in my view. And it's recognition and appreciation of my own self at the same time.
That's quite cool. So you mentioned a few points. I want to, I guess, unpack that a bit. Let's just start with the whole yoga in general. Because yoga does, in essence, it has many, I guess, definitions. But yoga is essentially it's supposed to bring about a level of mindfulness in life and that sort of stuff. So it's interesting that you've understood the connotations of saying that when it comes to something that's so aligned with spirituality and mindfulness and stuff like that, which I think is quite cool. I guess I just want to sort of understand, when you're doing the yoga, not just at the end of it, what are sort of thoughts are you experiencing? Do you practice that level of mindfulness? Are you listening to music? What is your thought process during that entire thing?
The key point is to focus on myself.
Okay.
And could differ for others. For me, I used to struggle with stress, personal as well as work, but more generally, just how to manage stress.
Right.
And yoga helped with that. In a way, during that time of practicing yoga, which is your question, I try and focus on my own That starts with breathing, and then feeling my bodies, and then bringing together to align that with my feelings and thinking.
Right.
So the key focus is, on myself and how I'm feeling, how I'm operating, and connecting that to my feeling and thinking going into after yoga, day to day, how I live is helpful in managing stress as well.
It's I completely agree. I think having that level of mindfulness and just having a time where you can reflect on your own self and just be in your own head, I think is a very needed thing in this day and age. Just because we're always hyper-connected, right? I think that's always it's always a bit of a thing. And it's interesting because you start, and I want to touch on the other point that you mentioned, right? When you give your salutations to the people around you, Mother Earth and all of this sort of stuff as well. It's weird because it's like, I'm a fundamental believer of like everything is you pushed out to some extent, in a spiritual sense, because like who you are is reflected in the world around you. So it's interesting that during that practice, you're very mindful about your inner sort of motions. And then as you come out of it, you so it comes from inside and it sort of expands outwards. And you start acknowledging the world around you and that sort of thing. Do you think it helps you? You mentioned like you initially did it for your stress levels, but do you think it helps you on your day-to-day basis where you're like, where you have a level of, I guess you're more cognizant of the people around you, of the world and Mother Nature and all that sort of stuff? Do you think it's impacted that at all?
I think that's a great way of connecting dots. And the answer is definitely help. When I'm stressed, when I'm not myself, when I don't even understand my full sense of how I'm feeling, how I'm operating, what's happening to my body, my thoughts, I can't quite fully appreciate and engage with outside world, other people and the nature, let alone doing work that can be positive to those outside just me in this world. So I definitely think it is aligned with your way of looking at the world, how you expand yourself and bring that impact to out the world. I guess the way through which yoga helps that is indeed by initially helping you understand yourself. But interestingly enough, you connected the dots here that the meaning of Namaste, the way I took the interpretation of my teacher is appreciating the broader world, people you practice with. So I think my own experience, as well as the meaning of yoga practice, now that I think about it, is both aligned in the connectivity between us as individuals and the broader world, other people and the nature.
It's a really nice sentiment because I know you want to do a lot of social impact work going forward, like it's in terms of your like long-term ambition, that sort of stuff. And we'll touch on that in a second, but it's kind of, so as you know, like I like quotes and stuff from books or TV shows or movies, wherever it may be. Like I always make a mental note or I'll write them down. And one that I've actually so this is one that I've stuck to the bottom of my monitor, and I've not actually told anyone this yet because no one looks at my desk. But I've stuck this to the bottom of my monitor, just on the side, so it's always hanging there, so I'm always perceptive of it. And it says, I don't know who the quote's by, completely forgot, but that's okay. The quote is, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I think these things have, it's very, it's interesting because I think things have like a bleeding effect, where one component of your life impacts another component of your life, which impacts another component of your life. And the reason I sort of made that connection between this mindfulness and what you get away from it, and the fact that you want to do social impact work, is because I think emotionally there is a bit of a thread that connects them. What do you think?
No, I think that's definitely the case. And I would go beyond just emotional and argue emotional as well as the actual impact itself, and the journey of which includes thinking, the physical actions, the energy that drives you to implement those changes, whatever you want to make a dent in the world. That all connects back to the energy, which yoga helps through this process of helping you focus on your own self and then expand out to the world, which we spoke about. And also connecting these learnings of oneself out to other people and the nature. That does require a lot of emotional energy to begin with. And therefore there is this point on sequencing of emotional, logical / thinking and physical actions. I think one can argue different sequencing, but building on your point, emotional bit is so fundamental that I would almost argue it needs to come first in order for the others to follow.
Right.
For that one action to have proper, good, positive spillover to the other parts of the world impact you're creating, which goes back to your point on doing one thing, the quote, and then that leads to the spillover effect and connecting to other things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting because I think, I guess the word grounding comes to mind. You have to be very grounded in yourself before you can start making further impact in the world, right? It's just like, how can you really create social impact if you don't have your own self in order? Because if you're not treating yourself positively, can you then bring positive impacts in the world around you? It's an interesting concept. I guess let's just expand a bit more in terms of the social impact that you want to do in the world, because I think that's always quite an interesting thing, and you've been quite fond of that for many years now, as like a long-term ambition. So do you just want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, so I've always been passionate about two things. One is environmental sustainability, and without being technical about what that means, to me what that means is us co-living with the nature long term. The other thing is economic inequality. Right. And again, without getting into the debates of the state of inequality, etc., to me that means living sustainability in the economy with others in the economy, which are simply put other human beings, sustainably over long term. And I think addressing the inequality is key to make sure our community, our system lasts long term.
Right.
So it really, both of them come down to this concept of co-living and getting well together, but not just today, this one-off party, the green party with nature, or fun collaboration with others, and then everyone going away. But over long term, how we as community can have good life together. So at top level, those two concepts have always been my passion. Passion, not in a sense, again, going in details, you could be passionate about something through the means of action, through the means of deep research, can take different forms. For me, when I say passion, means those two things have been top of my mind in terms of what I want to deliver as a long-term impact. And to finish off, that's aligned with the long-termness, the time horizon of these two goals on their own.
Right, and I think the point that you made about the passion can mean two things, where it's like if you're just interested versus if you're actually taking the action.
Yeah.
And because I think I am, like, this is like, I've made trip videos for a very long time, as you know. So making videos is just a bit of a passion of mine. And this is one of the few passions I've actually acted on. Like, I have an interest in like things like longevity research, like just like diets, that sort of stuff, like lifestyle, extending life and all that sort of stuff. But I've never really like acted on that. Like, I've never been to any seminars. I've never just read books and watch some podcasts. Like, that's the nature of it. And I just want to, I know you're big on like things like networking. I know you're big on things like you like ingesting knowledge and like other people's sort of thoughts and opinions about these topics. How do you think that plays into your, I guess, wider goal in terms of, how do the people you interact with sort of converge to sort of fulfill your ambition?
So I used to, when I was young, have this view where a long-term goal of mine is to be that one Jedi who solves all the world universe problems and come out of it as a top hero. now my view is, in order to address in long term these two long-term problems, I need a community where we all play our role to deliver on it.
Right.
Almost sound like a politician, but it's actually not just world of politics. This applies. I genuinely think from a small thing as a town level doing something for either local nature or local community, all the way down to starting a business. It's all about not you doing something heroic on your own, but finding a team, finding community, building that community, and going on direction together, everyone playing to their role.
Right.
So in that sense, it's really important for me to firstly try and find these people.
Right.
And before starting a team or anything like that, try and learn their different perspectives and appreciate them. And goes back to the yoga thing we spoke about, the meaning of namaste at the end. The interpretation being appreciating other people I just practice yoga with. Appreciating the different perspectives, learning from them, feed back into my, as you described, me digesting the knowledge base. And here, over time, I've become more humble in knowledge building. What I mean by that is almost risk averse in the knowledge building side of my life. Because in the long term, I don't want to be that guy who speaks as if he knows everything. But reality is no one knows everything. You're always on your learning curve. And there is always uncertainty on these really great broad topics, such as environment or social issues. So being humble and trying to appreciate different views, that's the key thing I'm trying to get out of what you described as networking. To me, it's not just networking, but meeting different views, trying to build community, trying to gauge how I might be building community in the future.
I like that point that you made about you're always on your learning curve. Like, I think that's a really nice point, and I think it's always difficult to appreciate to some extent, because you are always, bit by bit, increasing your knowledge span.
Yeah.
And I think I completely resonate with the whole, like, you don't want to be that guy who thinks he knows everything. Like, and I think the whole you're always on your learning curve does instill a bit of a level of humility to everything you do. And that's something I really resonated with. Where did you get that from? Is that just something you thought of? Or like...
Hard to say, from my own experience. Partially from watching people. Full range, from politicians all the way down to people in the circle, all the way down to myself, my own journey, where, as I said, when I was young, I thought I would be a Jedi who solves climate and social issue problems, but I no longer think that way because of the scale and dynamism of the problem, ever changing, ever growing, but also the world is so big and there are so many people who think and build expertise in such a different way to the way I can ever imagine.
Right.
But important in exploiting synergies between what they can achieve, their full potential, and mine.
Right. I think it's interesting how people pick their little niches where they want to sort of make the biggest impact that they can make. Because I think it's always a difficult decision. Because once you start, I'm not saying you can't pivot away, but I'm saying you've embarked on this journey now, and you have to put in a good amount of time and a good amount of effort before you're going to see results. And that's going to happen in anything you do, right? And when it comes to like picking this one thing, this issue that you want to solve, this way you want to sort of benefit the community and the people and your fellow people around you, I think that can be a very paralyzing concept, if you know what I mean. It's very, like that in itself, you could spend weeks, even years, just deciding, what do I want to do? Like, where do I want to make the biggest impact? And like, what are your thoughts around like making decisions about where you want to be exactly? Where do you want to place yourself in this big ecosystem where there's so many things to do and so many people to interact with, and so like how do you see yourself making the decision that inevitably chooses your path. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. It almost makes sense too painfully, because that's the hard question, and that's the question I am trying to inform myself fully to answer. Part of it is accepting I haven't got the answer yet. The other part is I am working to learn to network, to keep strategizing in order to find a good answer.
Right.
And in terms of everyone having their niche, and this goes back to my early point that top level, this appreciation of people, myself, and world, underlying that is almost sub-pillars of my philosophy.
Right.
One of which is actually corresponding to this. I genuinely believe everyone is master of something.
Right.
Around the world. I'm talking about literally every single person or entity in this universe is master of something.
Right.
We're all on our journey to find what that is.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily have to be the niche the way we societally think about.
Right.
Being good at programming, being good at writing, being good at exercise of specific sort. It could be a combination, but that package being something unique.
You're right.
Of their own meaning and of their own impact. So when I was back in elementary school, I started this almost religious sounding group called Masters, where it was a joke.
It sounds
thing, right?
it's okay.
Me and my friends, we called each other, "Oh, you're master of something," and I was master of playing recorder. You know that little plastic thing.
We learned that as well.
Yeah,
Like in school. Yeah.
I was simply the deadly recorder master just because I played
That's
best
pretty
in my
nice.
class back then when I was 11. There were some football masters or game master, those sort of things. And years later, I'm recognizing that there was actually meaning in what I did with my friends all these years ago.
I think when you're a kid, I think you can understand things but you don't understand how they play a part as you grow older. But I think when you do like a little retrospective, like, oh, I used to think this way, or I used to believe this, or I used to do a lot of this, and that's very strange, because like that philosophy as a kid still stands true to some extent. I think it's really nice that you like that sentiment, like there is a package allocated to you from the universe saying this is what you're going to be great at, but you have to find it out. I love, like, my favorite type of games are like the action adventure RPG open world, where you create a narrative for yourself, you create a story for yourself, and you can specialize in whatever you want to specialize in. And I think like a lot of these games, I use games because I used to play a lot of games growing up. I think they speak to people's soul, because I think all of us have a bit of a yearning for that, to like go out, have an adventure, and make our mark in the world, and go through like a little bit of self-discovery, and finding out what that process is when we go on these adventures and these little things that we do. And I guess I think this kind of brings me back to the question, like, what is the origin point, I guess? Like, when were you like this, and obviously the social impact side of things and community and the sustainability component and the economics component, obviously these are things that are marinated in your mind for quite some time now. But when did you start honing in on that? Because as far as I know, you've been quite interested in this for a long time. And you mentioned when you were a kid, you wanted to be that guy that could solve all the problems in the world. But then, when was the inflection point where you're like, okay, let me pick something in this ecosystem? Like, what brought that about?
Yeah. So the inflection point transition from Jedi to Master, I think that's almost there's a bit of a pun there. Is your question, and answer to that is disappointment, without pointing finger at any particular politicians, in politics at relatively young age. This is in Korea, where I grew up, and saw on TV where MPs in Korea were like almost fist fighting, and I mean, there are a lot of nasty things happening in politics around the world.
Yeah, of course,
but that particular scene was very sticky to my head, because that was around the time when I started building interest in these issues from reading news. From one point in my elementary school time, I went to protest with my dad on different issues, which is a separate story. But going back to this inflection point is, I put down my dream or career goal when I graduated elementary school as member of parliament.
Right.
And
Okay.
it was a fun activity everyone did in my school when they graduated from elementary school.
I wanted to be an actor.
Right. So you're an actor, I was MP. And then sooner or later, I found myself being disappointed in politicians not really delivering, or at least my young perspective thought they're just not changing the world. There's no such one person or group of people changing the world on their own.
Right.
And that's when I started searching for different career goals.
Right.
The point after that was journalist, because I thought politicians, they're not really doing much. Seems like on TV they're always arguing, fighting, not delivering. I enjoyed reading news a lot more than today, actually. Back in the day, and like physical newspaper. These days, it's all on the phone.
So digital.
Yeah, exactly. And every morning, had this relatively odd hobby of, after my dad reads the newspaper, I just take it and read it. At least a couple of articles, mainly on politics. And I thought that was cool. Maybe they can change the world by informing people on a range of different topics. So it's almost still one doing everything, in a way, through the means of writing about everything, rather than a specialization. So I went to some journalism summer school.
Oh, really? Okay.
When I was 13 or 12. And simply put, I didn't enjoy it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what was it that you didn't enjoy? Just the process of writing, or?
One thing I still remember is, in the process of writing, the summer school course was about very set style, structure, process around, here's the knowledge, digest it, crunch it in a certain way. It's almost like a sausage machine through which you produce the output. And that was quite different from the Jedi-looking journalists I had in my mind before going to the summer school. So that was new as well.
Right.
And over time, that led me to the world of social enterprise, where that's when I started getting interested in economics and business. And naturally, social enterprise, no given enterprise say they can solve all the problems of the world. They specialize. And that's the story of my inflection or journey from Jedi to master who is good at something. And that something could be as small as, playing recorder, like me back in the day, all the way down to broader issues and taking a good chunk share of it. But still, conceptually, it's specializing and being master in something rather than thinking you can solve the whole thing.
I really like that. That's very nice. I didn't know about that. I didn't know you were a master of recorder. I know you play guitar now, though.
Yeah.
When did you transition from recorder to guitar? When did that happen?
Middle school. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Just curious. I didn't.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting. I was never a master of anything when I was a kid. I I always had a big imagination. Did you ever watch Dragon Ball Z? Dragon Ball.
I played Dragon Ball game, but not.
So you get the concept.
Yeah.
But I always wanted to be like Goku, like go Super Saiyan.
Right.
Like that. What interested me about like growing up was not necessarily being a master, but leveling up, like being Super Saiyan 1, being Super Saiyan 2, Super Saiyan 3, like just surpassing my limit every time. Like that is what always entertained me. It was always like, even when playing games, it was like, I want to go and beat this boss, but I want to do it without losing like all my health. I want to do it without like losing half my health, or losing any health at all. So some of these goals were outrageous. Like I never achieved any of them when it came to games, but but as a kid, like those are the thoughts that kept me going. Like right now, for you, I think it was about finding something in the world to solve problems. For me, it was like, what can I do to be just a bit better? Like that is what I always thought about growing up. And it's interesting how like when we're kids, and I already mentioned, but it's weird how the philosophy of us growing up stays with us to some extent. Yeah. And it shows in the things that we do, right? And I'm just curious, like in terms of, do you think your upbringing in Korea, and you're in Japan for some time as well, do you think that's informed how you were today? Like I know you mentioned like the politicians in Korea, which is quite interesting, but do you think there were other things in that ecosystem that sort of made you into who you are, and then going to Japan and then coming to the UK, and now you've decided to stay, and you have a house now, and you have a good job, you have like, you've made your way up kind of thing. And like, do you think all these things played a part in sort of your future ambition?
Yeah, definitely. And
it's a broad question, I know. You can take a second. I realize that. So.
Yeah. I think two separate things almost, and where I'm struggling is to what extent they're related or overlap. One is to what extent these childhood experience and upbringing and my journey so far, particularly in terms of where I lived,
right,
and therefore people I lived with and met, influenced my life.
I think it's interesting from a cultural point of view.
Exactly. Okay. And the other part is to what extent they influenced my goals and my passion, my master, which our conversation so far has focused on. And immediately thinking, don't think there's that big of an overlap in a way. Yes, where I live so far, the communities, the cultures, the people I experienced have immensely influenced my personality, my appreciation of differences across communities, particularly having come to London. I say more so than Korea and Japan, because London being much more diverse.
Right.
But nonetheless, moving countries twice rather than once has definitely had quite a big impact, particularly that first time. And in Japan, I was part of the international community rather than being able to speak that well in Japanese and part of the Japanese community. And again, these are really substantial influence on my life as a whole, including through the ways I can't articulate or fully appreciate. But separately from that, though, in terms of my passion, the environment, social issues, and the politics, social enterprise, and long-term goals, I do wonder in counterfactual world, had I grown up in one of those countries or completely separate part of the world, whether I'd been equally interested in this, or coming back to broader topic of this conversation, whether I would have had similar philosophy, perhaps. And difficult to map these against the other pillar, so my upbringing and the cultures against my philosophy today and the goals.
Do you suspect that London has offered you better opportunities than other places would have, just because you've set up shop here a bit?
So the diversity point I mentioned earlier played a really big role to me. I'm not discounting the talents in other parts of the world, including Korea and Japan, but my personal experience of engaging with people, including you, but others who share perspectives, the networking, the community searching, and just engaging in different views and experiences, expertise, including on those topics that I am interested in on the environment and social side, are immensely helpful. And maybe it's because I was at that part of my life, early 20s, up until now, in late 20s. That's where I spent my time in London, and therefore that's where I absorbed so much more of things related to maturing and building on my perspective from this diverse views than my previous parts in my life. I don't know. But definitely I think the diversity of perspectives and experiences
Right.
are strongly correlated with cultural background diversities, which I think factually are stronger in London than other cities I had lived in before.
Right. Very interesting. I always find it quite interesting when people move country, just because I think there's always things you're giving up, and there's always things that you're gaining, and I think it's always a difficult thing to balance when you do stuff like that. And I'm not a stranger to that. I like my little challenges and stuff. And it's, I don't say do you have any regrets, but in retrospect, thinking back, do you feel like there are parts of you that would have benefited from, I guess, like, just having, if you had stayed there versus coming to London, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, 100%. Two sides to everything. And one thing I've come to realize more so than before in recent period is grass greener on the other side.
Yeah.
I'm almost overemphasizing this, but this has hit me really hard.
Right.
Not only for my own experience, but watching others making their decisions in recent time. So for instance, my brother, who studied in the US after moving to Japan with me and the family, recently made his way back to Korea because he has certain preferences around lifestyle and search for certain communities, a safer environment from his point of view, those sort of things. I think one big advantage, counterfactually speaking, would have been the strength in thinking, learning, and communicating in one language.
Okay.
Which goes against a lot of people, especially these days of well-connected world, saying you should learn a million languages. And I'm almost going against that common norm of today's, because I think there's huge benefit of mastering one language. It's not just about sounding good and pronunciation, tones, and delivery. It's also about the backhand side of it, where you think faster, clearer, and more strongly and effectively through that one language that you have mastered. And because moving to Japan, went to an international school, didn't really have a chance to study Japanese as much. I started picking up English at age of 16.
Right.
And until then, I went to state school in Korea the whole time, so didn't really learn English the way I would have learned if I gone to some special private school in Korea, which wasn't the case. So I started catching up on English, and then here I am, having moved to London 7 odd years ago. So I think I sound fine, but
You sound great,
I still struggle relative to this counterfactual. Had I lived in one country speaking one language, most likely Korea, given my childhood.
That's very interesting. I never, like the way you said that, like it improves your ability to think quickly and think sharply. I think in situations where, especially in like the workplace, I think it's huge, right? Like your ability to say very sophisticated things in a very quick way goes a long way.
Yeah.
Like if someone asks you a very complicated question and you
So
can
true.
answer it immediately, they know that you're on your stuff and you can articulate that very well, especially when it comes to like group meetings and that sort of stuff. I think there is a bit of an impetus there to be able to sort of articulate things as well as possible. And learning second languages and third languages and fourth languages, you lose a bit of that. Like obviously, like if you learn very well to a certain level of fluency, you're going to be fine. But I'm saying to get to that level takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of time. And if you wanted to be very, I don't know, obviously this is just my opinion, right? If you want to be really high up in a specific industry, you would have to speak the language of that industry. And there's just some things you're not going to learn if it's your second or third or fourth language. There's ways of speaking that you're not going to pick up on, because a lot of things get lost in translation, right? There's like like the British are very sarcastic. We have very sarcastic ways of speaking. If I said, that's great, you don't know if it's great. You don't. I could be saying it's horrible.
Or that's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, that's very cool. It could go either way. Like, no one would really know.
Yeah.
But the point is, you can only understand that if you've been here for a very long time. If you had come from somewhere else and say you knew English, but you didn't know British English in that sense that these are the implicit meanings of the things that you say, you wouldn't survive very long, right? Like, you wouldn't be able to have that rapport with people. And it's interesting that, because you've said mastery a couple of times now, and I feel like that is perhaps the theme of this conversation on top of like the impact with the world around you. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
And I think going back to this point on today's preference, with the example of people saying, oh, learn that language or that language and that language for traveling, for whatever opportunities out there, especially at younger age, and that's getting more and more younger these days, the age at which people want either their kids or perhaps kids themselves, if they have any views, want to learn either languages or other skills as well. And I think there's this trade-off between breadth and depth. That goes back to our conversation on language just now specifically, but taking steps back, this applies to a wider set of things in today's world where there's so much information out there, there's so many tools at hand. World is so much better connected than before, and this is gonna only accelerate this trend, broadly speaking, with the AI and more data, etc. So I think we shouldn't lose focus on the depth bit, and this connects to this master point we spoke about. I'm confident, again, it's my philosophy, everyone has their own master and everyone can become master of their own. We're on their own journey. I haven't quite nailed that at all. I'm on my own journey, and that journey requires depth as much as breadth. And I do think today's trends and preferences rotate more around breadth than depth at times. But look at people who have achieved things we all know of or speak about, things like AI or electric vehicles or other forms of technologies. Before this era, it was social media. It's all about depth alongside breadth.
I think this T-shaped economy is the way to go, right? When it comes to the things you learn, I think it's very good to have a bit of understanding of loads of different disciplines, but then you yourself have mastery over one.
Yeah.
Because that way you can communicate with everyone, but you can bring your own flair to the things that you say. And I guess in my own journey, like professionally or just even in personal development, like I want to have a handful of things which I know for sure. I know for certain I have complete understanding of these parts, and a little bit of understanding of a bunch of other things, so that even if I had to interact with anyone in the world, I could find some layer of understanding in some sort of topic at some point in time that we have both sort of explored. And I think that's really good at connecting people. And I think it's so hard because information is so readily available.
Exactly.
You could learn anything right now. Some of it might be wrong, but like that's the issue with misinformation, right? Like, because there's so much information, how do you discern what is good and what is bad and what you should be learning, what you shouldn't be learning? And I think that's partly again the issue with there's too much of a focus on breadth, is because there is so much available that people now have decision fatigue, where it's just like, shit, if I can do everything, if I can learn everything, why would I specialize in one? It's because I think people are just indecisive with what they want. That's my thoughts. I don't know. What do you think?
No, exactly. And it goes back to what we were talking off the record on social media versus reading.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Great example of breadth versus depth. Especially things like TikTok where you can,
Exactly.
you know, 10 seconds videos or even shorter, and each cut being, having made TikTok myself once, or TikTok style video rather, and I was making it, and my partner, who has more Gen Z knowledge than myself, told me, "Oh, you gotta shorten that." And initially, I thought, "Oh no, but that's a really beautiful picture I took, or the 5 seconds video. I want to show it all." And she said, "No, you gotta shorten it way more. Just pick the very best within that 5 seconds. Within 5 seconds, so that that overall, 50 seconds or 45 seconds TikTok style video contains more." And what ends up becoming is this like almost flashy, really short cuts compiled, and it's information overload to me, but that seems to be trendy, and I think goes back to the breadth versus depth, and reading being depth is, I mean, no need to explain on that.
I completely agree, and like that's, like I've not had social media for like a couple of years now, probably a year and a half actually, more so than a couple of years yet. But I had Instagram, I had TikTok, I had all these stuff, and it was just like, again, it's the whole like, it's like you said, they're just like flashes. They come and they go, and I'm not receptive to any of it.
Yeah.
Like I can't remember much of, like obviously it's been a year and a half, so you forget. But I'm saying, if I was to scroll through any sort of piece of social media, it probably wouldn't retain 90% of it, if I'm being honest. And that comes the same for like I enjoy YouTube. Like I watch a lot of YouTube videos, but like YouTube Shorts now as well. Like it's essentially the same thing, right? It's quick flashes, and it's, I think, because people just want as much as possible in the shortest amount of time. And I think that information overload is also, it's partly decision fatigue, because now it's like, I have so many options of what I can ingest. Yeah. What do I ingest? But it's also, I think, the decision has been also taken out of you. So for the people that can decide, there's too many options to decide from. But then for some people that are already indecisive, it's just like, well, I now can just go with the flow, and hopefully I'll find something, right? It's like, if I was looking for a restaurant, I could go on TikTok and find 1,000 restaurants in this area. That's not going to help me. Like, how do I know which one's the best restaurant? Because now all these videos have been made aesthetic. They've all been made tailored. They've all looked good, etc., etc., etc. And I think that, and just to sort of pull that back into the theme of this, right? It's like, mastery seems so interesting now, right? When you're looking at people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, whoever, like the upper echelons of entrepreneurship, right? That people that have started something and they've reached the top, and people are just like, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. But there's so many people now, and because I'm saying that because with the whole tech revolution, the people that were able to scale very quickly early on have now made it big. And hearing all these stories is just like, it's intimidating, because you're like, now it's like, oh wow, like how am I supposed to create a multi-billion, trillion, I guess, dollar industry? Well, two, it's because like, how, like, sorry, what was idea one? Idea one is, how do I create $1 trillion industry? And two is like, where would I even start? But the thing is, right, is that if you wanted to create $1 trillion industry, like they didn't start that way, right? Like you could very comfortably, I say comfortably, but I'm saying you could start something small, and you can have a team of 40, 50 people, and you can turn over a few million every year, and that's how you start, right? But people don't see that. People see the upper echelons because they're so easily exposed to us, like, or the other way around, we're so exposed to them. Like we see them on the news all the time, so we're like, those are the people we should aspire to be. But you don't see the smaller guys that are just starting out, that have multi-million-pound companies, that are doing quite well for themselves and are scaling. You don't see that, because they're all working away. They're all building that level of mastery. And then alternatively, it's like, when they started, when all these people began their journeys, they didn't have as widespread availability of options as we did. We have access to the internet and we can have courses in whatever we want. We can learn whatever we want. But they didn't have that. They had their books, they had some computer knowledge, and they just got to work. And they weren't distracted. They just had their goal. They had some television in their room maybe, but other than that, there was nothing else. And they had the time to build that mastery. And I don't know what question I'm going to gain from this, but that was just a bit my rant, just based on what you said. Because, I have thought about this quite often.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, I guess one point is to nonetheless acknowledge, to not discount the benefits of, what did you say, well-curated aesthetic, well-put-together information overload, because that T-shape, I really can feel the benefits of, is the breadth as well as depth. They both matter. And we live in this really advanced world today compared to back in the day where those folks may have just one crappy TV shared by 6 dudes who are pulling together some computer business, where we can go onto our phone and find great restaurants, great info list, perhaps some false info, but nonetheless much better set than what they had back in the day. The key thing is how to navigate that.
Exactly. Like,
and
how do we...
when we navigate that, be aware of both breadth and depth.
I agree. I think there is a huge upside because, say, there's 50 restaurants in the area. Well, I don't know why I think it's 1,000, but it doesn't matter. There's 50 restaurants, all well curated. But now you can see the food that's being served. You can see what the vibe is like. You can see all the energy. Like, it's way more descriptive than just finding any place and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And in that, you've gained a lot because it's enhanced your perspective. So whenever you're doing anything for the first time, you don't have to go in it with ignorance. You have some wisdom, you have some reference, you have some knowledge. And that's why I feel like social media has done really well, because it provides the ability for people to share their experiences has just benefited other people's adventures whenever they're doing whatever they're doing, because now they can choose. They're like, I like that place, let's go check that out, kind of thing. And I think that is a nice sentiment. But I think when it comes to sort of the long-term view of what we want in life, I think in the context of like making decisions, it's probably dragged us down, because now it's like, why would you want to make a decision when there's of what single thing you want to do when there's so many options available to you, if that makes sense? It's like you have so many options, so it's difficult. It's very difficult. And I don't really know where to take it, to be honest. It's I guess I'm very polarized and I'm very biased in my opinion, just because, I don't know, I didn't see the benefit personally. I don't know if you do. When it comes to achieving mastery, like how do you go about managing the dynamic between focusing wholeheartedly on a single thing but also wanting to expose yourself to all there is?
Yeah. Short example, those smaller guys, entrepreneurs you described versus big ones like Musk and Bezos do benefit, perhaps not equally, but proportionate to their resources and time allowed and scale from these platforms through which, compared to back in the day where you have to be going through newspaper or TV, whatever. I can go on LinkedIn and find these if I'm interested in learning more about them.
Right.
Or I can visit other platforms if they are operational on those platforms to communicate their goals, share updates, etc. So that has enabled more of smaller community comms, as well as education pieces, as well as meetups, etc. So there's two sides to everything.
I agree.
And this is one example that shows good sides of the breadth bit, which can then subsequently lead to one saying, thanks to social media, I accessed this particular small seed idea that might change the world. Someone's working on it, let me dig into it. And that can lead to that person's depth.
Right. That's a very nice way to put it. Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that, so it's a very fair point.
But works differently for everyone, so...
I think, for a lot of people, you never know where it's going to lead. Like, every little bit of information helps, right? And I think being able to share that is, at its core, something that becomes very beneficial to people. I think when it comes to things like you said, like mastery and just being, I guess, acknowledging the world around you and the people in it and the earth and that sort of stuff, and just having mastery, I guess, if you had to leave like a closing sentence, what would that be?
So, can you repeat the question?
I meant more just like, because I think mastery is something that we touched on quite a bit, right? But your initial philosophy was more around giving back to the world and that sort of stuff. So if you had to sort of draw a line in I guess a bit of a succinct way between them, like how would you phrase that? Just as like a closing statement.
Yeah. So instead of drawing the line between the two, I would almost bring them together.
Yeah, do it.
By everyone, including us two, including anyone else watching this and beyond, all of us on our respective journey to find and realize our masters, we move the world closer to the better state where, as I described, whether that's economic or environmental, good world where we can all collaborate and co-live together long term. That's my belief. And all these masters, often we think, including the ones we often think are not relevant to mine or yours, could be more important in our journey. As we learn on our journey further down the line, we might find ways to collaborate. So never forget them. Stick to your journey. As you said, your earlier philosophy when you were a childhood, that game, leveling up one by one. Continue on that. But in that journey, be open to collaborate and exploit synergies with others. And together, that's the way we push the world forward towards step-by-step better way. That's the way I think about it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Anyway, thanks guys for tuning into this episode. I think that's a really nice place to end it. Thank you for coming. I guess I came to his place today, so it's a bit of a different situation.
Still good vibes. Still good vibes.
Still good vibes.
And
still
good chat.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for having me over today to do this. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, great
and,
chat.
I'll see you guys in the next one.